On a lonely Wyoming road at dusk, an aging veterinarian stopped beside a fallen bobcat mother, then heard the faint cry of life beneath the snow. He took the orphaned cub home, and with his loyal dog, raised it with quiet, steadfast love. Years later, the wild called it back, but one winter night, the bobcat returned, something held gently in its mouth, and what it brought would leave even the coldest hearts completely still. The last light of a Wyoming sunset spilled across the narrow road, painting the pines in bruised gold and shadow. Dr. Samuel Hayes drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near Ranger, his old Belgian Malinois. The dog's ears twitched. Out here, silence always meant something. A dark shape appeared on the shoulder ahead. Samuel eased the truck to a stop, headlights catching the still form of a bobcat. The mother lay twisted on the gravel, fur dusted with frost, her chest unmoving. He sighed softly, another wild life ended by the highway. Then he heard it, a faint, broken cry from the ditch. He followed the sound into the weeds and found a kitten no bigger than his palm, trembling beside its mother's tail. Its fur was damp, its breath thin as mist. Ranger stood nearby, tail still, eyes fixed on the tiny shape. The kitten mewed once, weak but stubborn, and Samuel's heart clenched the way it hadn't in years. He scooped it into his coat, feeling the fragile ribs against his chest. The bobcat's heartbeat fluttered like a fading ember. "Easy, little one," he murmured. Ranger sniffed the bundle and gave a low whine, a sound Samuel hadn't heard since his wife passed. He knew then he wouldn't be calling animal control tonight. Back at the cabin, Samuel cleared the old kitchen table, laid down a towel, and turned up the wood stove. The bobcat kitten lay motionless until the warmth reached it. Then, slowly, it lifted its head and blinked. Eyes like molten amber caught the firelight. Ranger sat nearby, watching every breath as if guarding a secret. Samuel mixed goat's milk and water, warmed it to his wrist. The kitten refused at first, then clamped its teeth around the rubber tip. Each swallow sounded like a promise. When it finished, it collapsed against the towel, chest rising and falling in tiny waves. Samuel smiled faintly. "You're a fighter," he whispered. He called Marion Pierce, the local ranger. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp from years in the field. "Sam, you know the law. You can't keep a wildcat." He stared at the sleeping bundle. "It won't make it to morning out there." Silence stretched, then Marion sighed. "One night, but don't name it." By dawn, the kitten was still alive and stronger. It tried to climb the edge of the towel, paws slipping, determination fierce. Ranger watched from the doorway, tail sweeping the floor in slow rhythm. The dog lowered his head until nose met fur, and the bobcat pressed against him without fear. Something unspoken passed between them. Marion arrived mid-morning, boots muddy, face half skeptical, but when she saw the kitten nestled against Ranger's side, her expression softened. "That dog of yours," she said quietly, "has no idea what species means." Samuel smiled. "Neither do I anymore." Marion looked once more at the bobcat. "All right then. One chance." The kitten slept most of the day. Outside, snow began to fall, soft flakes tapping the windows. Inside, the fire's glow reached the walls, wrapping man, dog, and wild creature in the same warmth. For the first time in months, Samuel felt the house breathing again, alive, fragile, and full of quiet hope. When the storm thickened that night, Ranger curled near the hearth. The bobcats stirred, stretched, and crawled close, tiny paws sinking into the dog's fur. Samuel watched the two shapes by the fire, a wild soul and a loyal heart, bound by something no rule could name. He whispered, "You'll be called Milo." And then, outside, the wind howled across the frozen fields, erasing every human sound. Inside that little cabin, under the hum of the fire, 3 lives began to weave together, one carrying grief, one guarding loyalty, and one just learning to breathe. It was the start of a story no one would believe, yet every heartbeat was true. Morning slid in pale and cold, glazing the windows with breath frost. The bobcat kitten woke first. Milo stretched, a soft ripple of spots and ribs, and tested the cabin air with a tiny hiss that wasn't anger so much as wonder. Ranger answered with a low chuff, as if returning the room to order. Samuel warmed milk in a dented pan, tapping the spoon like a metronome. Milo watched the steam, ears flicking, patience thin as a thread. When the bottle touched his mouth, he seized it with both paws, small claws, desperate will. Outside, the snow fell like unasked questions, piling without sound. Between feedings, Milo explored. Every scent was a history, every shadow a dare. He climbed the leg of Samuel's chair, slid back and regrouped. The kitten's paws were too big for his size, his balance a promise for later. Ranger shadowed him, body forming quiet guardrails he never needed to bark into place. Marion arrived at noon, boots dripping meltwater. Her gaze took the room in sections: stove, bowl, dog, man, then landed on Milo, crouched on a folded sweater. The kitten lifted his head, gold eyes steady. Marion didn't smile, but her shoulders fell a fraction, like someone lowering a weapon. "You knew I'd come," she said, kneeling. Milo sniffed the air round her glove, reading cedar and rain and road salt. She offered the back of her hand. He didn't touch it, only stared. "He's choosing," she murmured. Samuel heard the warning tucked inside the wonder. Choices made now would echo later. The first wobble came at dusk. Milo ate, then stumbled, breath fluttering thin. Samuel felt the heat under the fur too high. He cooled towels, measured meds, whispered nonsense to anchor courage. Ranger pressed close, lending warmth without smothering. Marion timed the breaths, jaw set against fear she refused to name. Hours stretched, the storm lifted, and the moon made a pale coin on the floorboards. Milo's breathing evened, small engine catching. He licked his own nose, offended by the world's fuss. Marion exhaled. Finally, "A night like this," she said, "is where people mistake mercy for ownership. Don't." Samuel nodded, though his heart had already crossed a line. He wasn't trying to tame a wild thing. He was trying to keep a heartbeat from leaving the room. Milo blinked slow, the feline olive branch. Ranger answered with a yawn the size of forgiveness, and nosed the bottle cap back towards Samuel's palm. In the days that followed, rhythm found them. Milo learned the cabin's map, the warm ellipse near the stove, the slick danger of tile, the good echo under the table. He pounced bottle caps with solemn ceremony, froze at drifting ash, then sprang at dust like it owed him money. Practice for a future he couldn't name. Marion brought paperwork, dry and official, temporary authorization, conditions like fences, no public display, gradual weaning, evaluation in spring. He stays wild, she said. Milo punctuated the sentence by batting a coil of twine into a perfect kill. The room agreed with a silence that felt like law and prayer. At twilight, Ranger taught lessons without language. He stood still, and Milo studied stillness. He shifted weight, and Milo mirrored the shift. The dog turned his head to catch a draft. The kitten learned wind. Samuel filmed a few minutes, then put the camera down. Some moments were better in bones than pixels. On the 5th morning, Milo found his reflection in the black window and puffed twice his size. The cabin held the pose with him, honoring the wild rehearsal. When he settled, he curled into Ranger's tail, a ring inside a ring. Samuel watched the fire mirror in both sets of eyes and understood the problem of miracles. That night, a fox barked from the tree line. Milo rose, long and certain, a tiny statue carved from dusk. He didn't run to the door. He simply listened, collected the sound like a tool he would one day need, and lay down again. Outside was cooling. Inside kept time. The house, for now, still held. Morning thinned the frost on the pasture, turning every blade of grass into a small window. Milo stepped out first, testing the light like a new language. His paws pressed careful signatures into the rhymed earth. Ranger paced a slow circle, mapping a safe perimeter the way old soldiers draw borders with breath. The bobcat discovered distance the way a violin finds pitch. 10 steps from the porch felt like a cliff. 20 felt like a prayer answered. He lowered to his belly, every whisker tuned, then rose and floated 3 strides, cat-soft and cloud-sure. Samuel watched his outline sharpen against the field. Part fear, part pride. Ranger taught without ceremony. He stood into the wind, and Milo read the invisible script. The dog's ear tilted, the kitten's ear copied. A perfect rhyme. Ranger anchored, Milo flowed. Where the dog marked patience, the cat wrote silence. Their duet was not affection first, it was craft, and craft made trust. Samuel filmed on the old camcorder until the little red light felt rude. He dropped the camera to his chest and just listened. Claws ticking wood, a tail brushing cedar, the low thrum of a Malinois' contentment. The world held steady for a whole minute. In that rare, quiet, grief loosened a knot and slipped off. Marion arrived with the smell of cold river on her coat. She stood hands in pockets, eyes in field mode. When Milo crept toward her boot, not touching, only measuring, she murmured, "That's a hunter's distance." Samuel nodded. "And a survivor's," Marion's mouth quirked. "Let's help him be both without stealing either." Milo's body lengthened by the day, legs that once fumbled now folding like knives. He shadowed Ranger's shadow, then broke free to try a solo prowl, a stitched line through grass and burr. When he returned, he brushed past the dog's shoulder with deliberate grace, a filled salute. Ranger replied with a single blink. It ended fast. A coyote ghosted the fence line, all ribs and hunger, born of lean weather. Milo stiffened, too young to measure risk, too new to fear correctly. Ranger threw himself between them, shoulders squared into bright teeth and winter breath. The coyote fainted, found grit, and vanished, insulted by conviction. Ranger limped back with a nicked foreleg, the kind of wound that stings pride first. Milo followed, low and vibrating. Confusion knotted to relief. In the doorway, he pressed his face into the dog's ruff and began a clumsy, grooming, sandpaper tongue and apology. Samuel swabbed the cut. "Easy, boys," he said. "We keep." Marion cleaned her glasses like she was polishing a thought. "He's learning from the dog," she said. And about the dog, her gaze tracked Milo's arc to the window, where night thickened like ink. Soft release stays the plan. More field lessons, fewer house myths. Samuel agreed, though his chest said stay. Dusk-printed coyote echoes across the property, thin ribbons of dare. Milo stood on the sill and listened until the sound unspooled. The porch light left him half comet, half shadow. He didn't scratch the door. He didn't cry. He absorbed the wild like heat, then settled beside Ranger, taking the watch no one assigned. Snow came on cat feet, a whisper that erased. Samuel built a larger run against the trees, branches woven into a roof of honest weather. Milo practiced in it at dawn, exploding through powder after moth flickers and phantom mice, missing often, learning more. Ranger padded the edges, inspector and priest. By week's end, the three of them moved like a small weather system, front, current, and clear. The field forgot their tracks by noon, but the house remembered their breathing. When Samuel banked the fire, Milo lifted his head, eyes lantern bright, then lay it back on Ranger's paw. Outside waited, inside hummed and held. Dawn slipped in like a careful guest. Milo padded the perimeter of the new run, shoulders rolling under spotted fur, breath ghosting the wire. The world smelled wider after snow pine lifted, iron cold, a fox thread fading. He paused, listening to a silence that didn't belong to houses. Samuel opened the side gate and stood back. He had stopped calling the cat by name aloud, as if names braided rope. Ranger trotted in a slow figure eight, offering steadiness. Milo watched the hinge swing, watched air move through an opening larger than the door. Something old in him stepped toward it. Marion arrived with a file that felt heavier than paper. "Soft release," she said, voice even. "Long leash of place, short leash of habit." Milo measured her with a glance and went back to the wind, where instruction didn't need vowels. The fence wasn't a wall to him. It was a line to practice crossing. The bobcat grew all at once. His hips lengthened, neck corded, paws landing without apology. When Ranger stilled, Milo didn't mirror. He orbited, gravity shifting. He stalked snow-laced shadows, then froze at a pine's rough grammar, head tilted like a scholar. The forest read him back, sentence by sentence. It began with a sound he didn't mean. A low chord in his chest swelled into a warning, small and sure. Ranger stopped mid-step, surprised. Samuel blinked. That voice had slept under kitten breath for weeks. Now it turned its face to daylight. Milo shut it off clean, startled by his own switch. Food no longer tasted like rescue. It tasted like fuel. He ate, then pushed away, pacing the run's far edge. Eyes keyed to distances humans couldn't inventory. When a jay scolded above the spruce, he didn't flinch. He calculated. The math lived in his tail, in the elastic between pause and pounce. Samuel set the gate wide and stepped clear. He had taught himself to leave space the way carpenters leave room for wood to swell. Ranger waited at heel, not looking at the opening, not making it important. Milo considered nothing and everything the way wild things do, and breathed like a bellows. He moved, a single, precise crossing, no drama, no second look like water finding slope. Samuel's hands knotted and went quiet again. Marion exhaled carefully, as though the air itself could spook instinct. On the other side of the line, Milo lifted his head and listened for a boundary he could not see. The forest did not welcome him. It simply made room. Needles murmured. A squirrel threw curses. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked under weight not his. Milo melted between juniper humps, shoulders, reading terrain like Braille. He left prints he didn't intend to return to. The run behind him became yesterday. At first he circled, returning every hour as if checking a shore he might need again. Each pass he stayed less. He brushed Ranger once with a flicked flank and acknowledgement, not a goodbye. Samuel pretended to sweep the porch. Marion wrote nothing. They all practiced not chasing what should go. The surge came near dusk. A coyote song unzipped the hills, and Milo answered without sound, body tightening into purpose. He paused, looked back once past dog, past man, through years packed into winter light. Then he slipped down the draw, a moving ellipsis. Ranger did not follow. Samuel did not call. Night broke across the ridge like ink. The gate remained open, porch lamp dimmed to ember. Ranger turned 3 slow circles and lay with his nose pointed toward the timberline. Samuel sat on the step, hands empty, hearing only the stove tick. The house learned anew, quiet, and held it, gently, for him. Winter learned the cabin's habits and copied them. Dawn arrived late, pale as old paper, and the porch boards held their breath. Samuel moved slower now, a kettle's small song replacing conversation. Ranger slept deeper, waking to sniff the door jamb, as if memory itself had a scent that changed with weather. Milo was absence you could hear. The yard kept his outline, the way a bed keeps a body pressed then empty. Samuel swept the step he didn't need to sweep. Ranger patrolled half circles and stopped where the fence used to matter. The quiet wasn't hollow. It had weight, a stone you carry so it won't fall. Days found a rhythm of almosts. A jay's scold ricocheted like a warning meant for someone not here. A tuft of fur snagged on wire turned out to be grass bleached by frost. Samuel learned to name false hope gently. Ranger learned to lie still longer, the way sentries keep watch over what isn't coming. Snow returned in thin rehearsals, dusting the pasture, mapping the world in handwriting even old eyes could read. Samuel stepped carefully, not to blur fresh script. Ranger's tracks doubled back like thoughts. At dusk, the wind rose and fell, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a knock sounded, too even for branches. Samuel held the latch and didn't open it. Not yet. There is a way to break a miracle by trying to see it too soon. The kettle ticked off. Ranger's ears found a compass point and locked. Between two breaths, the house gathered itself like a choir, waiting on a downbeat no human hand would give. Night laid its cards. Nothing. Only stars, hard and bright, and the groan of trees turning in their sleep. Samuel laughed at himself without sound. Ranger drank and settled. The porch light hummed. If hope was a wire, it tightened, then slackened, and the beam drew moths who believed in fixed suns. Morning brought evidence, not certainty. Along the base of the porch, 4 prints, like stitched commas, curved to the window and away, too round for fox, too heavy for house cat. Samuel crouched, breath pluming. Ranger didn't bark. He nosed each stamp delicately, then looked to the timberline, the way prayers do. Samuel fetched the old tape measure and then put it back. Some measurements invite loss. He traced the pads with a mittened finger and let his chest hurt in the good way wounds do when they begin to heal. Inside, the kettle sighed again, a nervous habit the room had learned from its keeper. Marion arrived in a scarf, stiff with road cold. She studied the prints, said nothing first. Then, front pad's broader, gait even, he's sound. No congratulations, no lecture. Her hand hovered over the railing, then fell. Could be passing through, Samuel nodded. Passing can still mean home if you pass enough. By noon the sun chewed the edges off each print until they were almost ideas. Ranger seemed satisfied with that. Ideas were easier to guard. He lay with his chest on the threshold, head out, tail in, a hinge breathing. Samuel oiled the door and didn't test it. Some doors swing better when asked softly. Dusk teased again, a shadow that might have been a cat, might have been longing, remembering its shape. Ranger lifted once, ears pricked, then settled. Samuel stood in the dark kitchen without turning on the light. Outside, the snow took notes. Inside, a man and a dog kept time for something returning to itself. When the moon hauled itself over the ridge, the prints were bright as coins. Samuel whispered Milo, not summoning, only honoring the name that carried them this far. Ranger exhaled and let sleep take the first watch. The porch, newly expert in absence, learned to hold presence too, and did, without breaking. The thaw came late that year. Snow lingered in the hollows, stubborn as memory, and the creek broke open 1 inch at a time. Samuel and Ranger moved through the slow melt like ghosts keeping watch. The cabin creaked as if remembering other winters, when 3 breaths instead of 2 had warmed its air. That evening, wind carried the faintest rustle, a cadence neither storm nor branch. Ranger rose from the hearth before Samuel heard it. His ears caught the direction, his eyes the certainty. Outside, The yard glowed silver under the moon. The world felt held between heartbeat and echo. Something waited at the edge of the porch. A shadow thickened, then stepped forward, every movement deliberate. Frost crystals shimmered along its coat. Milo, taller now, chest wide, tail a question mark of quiet command. The wild had polished him to steel and grace. He looked less tamed, more complete. Samuel didn't move. He'd learned that stillness spoke the language Milo remembered. The bobcat stopped 3 steps away, nostrils flaring. Between them stretched 4 years of silence and trust unbroken. Ranger broke it first. A low, tremulous whine that wasn't fear or joy, but something older, an animal prayer. Milo lowered his head, the same bow he'd given as a cub to the dog who once stood guard. In his mouth, glinting in the porch light, hung a limp rabbit, cleanly caught. He set it on the boards, paws framing the gift, then stepped back, waiting. Not a plea, not hunger. An offering drawn from instinct and memory. Samuel's breath clouded and vanished. Ranger approached, sniffed the rabbit, then looked up at the cat, tail swaying once like a handshake. Milo's eyes softened to amber glass. For a moment, predator and protector shared the same pulse. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition, pure and wordless. Marion's truck lights appeared down the road, throwing long bars through the trees. The bobcat's ears flicked. The spell trembled. She climbed from the cab, boots crunching the frost. Her voice broke the air. Sam? Milo turned, muscles coiling with wild precision. Easy, Samuel whispered. He just came home. But the forest called faster than comfort could answer. In one liquid motion, Milo slipped from the porch, his shape folding back into timber and dark. The trees took him without resistance. The rabbit remained warm still, its blood steaming like breath. Marion stared, disbelief settling into reverence. Inside, the fire popped once, as if echoing the pulse of the scene outside. Samuel crouched beside the rabbit, fingers hovering above the fur. It wasn't food, he said softly. It was language. Ranger lay down near the door again, eyes trained on the dark, waiting for a sound that would not return tonight. Later, Marion poured coffee neither of them needed. The silence carried weight but no ache. He remembers, she said finally. Samuel nodded. And he's teaching me to do the same. They didn't touch the rabbit. By dawn it was gone, dragged off by some smaller creature that believed in luck more than meaning. The next evening, snow flurries returned, brief and shy. Samuel left the porch light burning, not as invitation, but as acknowledgement. Ranger dozed, twitching through dreams filled with scents no human could name. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a wild heart beat in rhythm with the cabin's slow, contented sigh. Before sleep took him, Samuel stepped outside. The forest hummed in shades of grey and distance. He whispered into the cold, "Thank you for coming back." The wind moved through the pines, a gentle, knowing sound. For the first time in years, the night didn't feel empty. It felt shared. Morning came without colour. A soft hush pressed to the windows. Samuel caught it first a faint track beneath the porch. Not new, not old. A careful signature curving toward the drawer. Ranger tested the wind and held still. On the step lay a single guard hair, banded and coarse, Milo's or Winter's coincidence. Marion arrived with the road on her boots and a map in her eyes. They walked the margin where field became timber, following the stitched commas of bobcat pads, too large, too smaller, scattered like second thoughts. The print line faltered near a wind throw, then veered down slope, a tired sentence seeking breath. They found quiet before they found anything else. Then a small sound, thin as a thread, pulled the air apart. Ranger froze, muzzle tilted. Samuel parted the brush at the base of a blown pine. In the hollow, two bobcat kits stared back, bellies tucked, ears too big for their faces. Hunger had made them brave. One kit hissed without wind. The other didn't waste the energy. Samuel read dehydration along the lip, a wobble in stance, the math of failing warmth. He scanned for a queen's print and found none. Marion's jaw set. We step wrong. We break them. We step back. We lose them. The forest waited, not offering counsel. Ranger lay sphinx still at 10 paces, a boundary marker no one taught him to be. Samuel eased a thermal blanket into the hollow, not touching fur, only trading air for kinder air. The kits shivered, then settled, eyes half-lidded. Above them, snow began the small business of covering everything equally. They worked in whispers that weren't for the animals so much as for themselves. Marion measured the distance to the porch, the path of least scent, the way the wind would tell the hill what happened here. Samuel mixed formula in a flask, thinned for shock, thickened for will. He offered a drop. Tiny jaws negotiated mercy. A shadow unstitched from the dark. Milo stood uphill, broad and silent. The forest's answer to a prayer no human would have dared say aloud. He didn't descend. He watched the hollow, then Samuel, then Ranger, then back. His tail made one slow arc, not permission, not warning, a briefing from a commander of one. Samuel didn't speak his name. He set the flask on the root and backed away, palms open. Milo slid down 3 steps of earth, placed a paw beside the kits, and breathed over them. He touched nothing. The kits lifted, found the heat of his exhale, and steadied. Marion's breath hitched and didn't quite return. They established a rhythm, shelter refreshed at dusk, scent kept spare, visits short as a good apology. Milo came at night, prints overlaying theirs, a counter-signature that made the record whole. Ranger kept a silent perimeter, eyes on the slope, the old guardian recognizing a younger one's watch. On the 3rd evening, coyotes stitched the ridge with hunger songs. Milo materialized between den and song, a line no coyote crossed. He neither chased nor posed. He occupied. The kits slept through the arithmetic of threat. Samuel felt his pulse slow to the bobcat's math space. Held, cost accounted, debt paid. By week's end, the kits hunted moths that didn't need hunting, stepping too high, landing too proud, their coats filled, their eyes sharpened. Samuel and Marion reduced their touches to air and shadow. Ranger slept near the threshold, content with the job of hinge again. The hollow smelled like breath and pine. At dawn, a skiff of snow reset the ledger. Fresh prints led away small, paired, confident. Milo's track followed, not too close, not too far, the right distance between teaching and leaving. Samuel stood a long time, then covered the den with clean boughs. "We were the middle," he said. Marion nodded. "And that's enough." Morning light sifted through lodgepoles, thin as gauze. The hollow was empty now, only the shape of sleep left in the needles. Milo patrolled a slow arc above it, reading last night's wind and the new day's traffic. The kits were moving farther each dawn, stitching distance into their growing bodies. Samuel built a shelter at the tree line. Nothing domestic, just poles and boughs, angled to borrow warmth. He worked like a guest who knows not to rearrange furniture. Ranger lay a yard off, breathing steady guard. Marion flagged the path with brush, not tape, so the forest could accept or deny it at will. By dusk, Milo appeared on the ridge, a bronze seam against fading sky. He didn't approach the shelter. He measured it. The kits ghosted in and out, touching the threshold as if testing a word. Samuel left a shallow pan of water. No scent on the rim. He stepped back until his breath no longer carried. They ate the night in thin slices. Coyotes stitched a far hill. Owls unstitched it. Milo stood where sound broke and chose what passed. The kits learned to ignore noise that only wanted attention and listen for the one twig that meant arithmetic. Their small bodies practiced the pause that becomes survival. Mariam returned with paperwork that spoke softly and carried teeth. Emergency fostering, limited human contact, a calendar built of conditions. She signed with a pen that had seen too many compromises and not enough miracles. "We're scaffolding, not walls," she said. Milo, uphill, blinked slow like a teacher's ascent. On the third day, Owen Keller arrived. Skepticism zipped into a grey jacket. He unpacked trail cams with surgeon care. Angles plotted like proofs. "If it can't be recorded, it didn't happen," he said, half a joke, half a shield. Ranger watched from the shade, unimpressed by the religion of lenses. The first night, the cameras hummed. Red diodes winked like uncertain stars. Morning brought cards full of nothing, snowdrift, branch bow, a moth auditioning for cinema. Owen frowned, adjusted sensitivity, recalibrated faith. "Batteries," he muttered, though the readings were fine. Marion didn't argue. She had seen quieter refusals. Samuel tried once, lifting his old camcorder. The screen framed Milo on the ridge, the kits below like commas in a longer sentence. Then the image stuttered, froze on a single whisker haloed with frost, and went dark. The device still weighed the same. It just wouldn't witness. Some stories demand bone, not tape. At twilight, Milo descended to the shelter's shadow. He didn't enter. He placed one paw on the threshold and breathed. The kit settled, ears cupping his exhale. Samuel stood where trees made a dim cathedral and felt something old lift the sense that he was not needed so much as trusted to vanish. Night cracked with a fox's complaint. One kit flinched, the other pretended not to, which is how courage gets built. Milo turned, not to chase, but to occupy. His body made a line where worry couldn't cross. Ranger answered by not moving at all, a stillness that told the ground this ground was claimed. Snow came again, soft as revision. By dawn, fresh tracks wrote a new sentence, small prints leading away into order and rise. Milo's stride a parenthesis around them. Marion exhaled a held weep. "They're writing themselves," she said. Samuel closed the shelter halfway, an invitation folded back into forest. Owen packed his cameras with care that bordered on apology. "I have blanks," he admitted, almost pleased by the failure. "Maybe that's the point." He shook Samuel's hand, like he was touching a field note that finally breathed. Marion smiled without letting it show. Ranger yawned in fluent dismissal. Milo paused on the far slope and looked back once not farewell inventory. The cabin, the hinge of porch light, the shelter already becoming weather. He tipped his head to the wind and slipped into it. The kits followed, small shadows, learning the grammar of distance. Behind them, the circle held, then widened. Winter settled with a kind of kindness, muffling the road and shouldering the trees. Ranger moved slower, a hinge grown stiff. Samuel kept the fire honest and the kettle talking. Out beyond the fence, the hills wore their white discipline. Somewhere inside that quiet, a wild heartbeat kept its own time. Milo's visits had thinned to rumour. A whisker of print here, a scuff of frost there. The sense of being watched by something that preferred memory to shadow. Samuel learned to read absence the way he once read tracks, by what the wind refused to say. The porchlight held a patient, unblinking watch. One night the dog did not rise. He breathed once, deep as a lake, and let go. Samuel folded his hands on the old skull, foreheads touching. No words, only the oldest promise. Dawn found a gentle crust on the snow and a simple hole in the world. The cabin's air leaned toward the empty bed. They carried Ranger to the hill where the field begins to think like forest. Marion came, quiet as pine, and helped lift the earth with slow, deliberate strokes. Samuel laid the collar in the dirt, a circle inside a circle. Above them, the sky held its cold blue like a well, with no rope long enough. They covered the mound with boughs. Samuel pressed his palm to the needles until the sting turned warm. No prayer, no speech, just the work of finishing. Marion stood back, hands in pockets. "He kept a good border," she said. Samuel nodded. Borders had been the dog's hymn and the bobcat's grammar. Night kept the cabin, but the hill kept him. Samuel slept in the chair by the window, waking at the smallest rumour of drift. Sometime past midnight, the wind shifted cedar, iron, something older. He rose without turning on a light. The shadows had a shape he recognized, even when the shape preferred not to be seen. Milo stood at the hill's hem, cut from moon and stillness. He did not approach the house. He read the new contour where snow lay too carefully. Then he stepped forward with ceremony. A cat seldom bothers to keep. In his mouth hung a rabbit, clean and warm, winter distilled into weight and gift. He placed it at the foot of the mound, paws framing the offering the way he once framed breath on a porch. He did not look at the cabin. He looked at the earth. His tail drew one slow arc, the kind a compass makes when it knows the only direction. Marion's breath fogged. Samuel's did not dare. For a long beat, nothing moved. Then the bobcat bowed, not as pets bow to hands, but as kin bow to labour. He turned to leave, paused, and glanced toward the old window. Amber eyes caught a thin pane of light and held it. Recognition is not the same as farewell, but sometimes it must be enough. By morning, small tracks littered the grave, telling the honest story of winter hunger. The gift had fed what needed feeding. Samuel didn't mind. Meaning had eaten first. He brushed the snow smooth again and set a stone flat, river-worn, the size of a heart he could carry without breaking. Marion said nothing until the thermos clicked shut. He returned in the way he could. Samuel touched the cold stone and said what we couldn't. Downhill, the creek started its thaw, a handful of notes testing the key. Above them, a hawk drew an invisible axis through sky and kept going. That evening, the house breathed differently lighter, as if a knot had learned how to be a cord. Samuel left the porch light off. He didn't need it. Out beyond the fence, the snow remembered two animals who once shared a watch. The hill held its silence. Somewhere in the timber, a cat walked away, unlost. Spring arrived like a patient answer. The hill greened first along the grave's edges, a soft ring where memory kept the soil warm. Samuel moved lighter, not younger, carrying chores in both hands. In the timber, a bobcat moved too, Milo tracing the old perimeter, the way a scout reads a friendly border. He came rarely now, a rumour stitched to wind. Sometimes the yard held a single print, sharp as a thought, sometimes nothing at all, which was its own kind of presence. Samuel learned to greet both. He talked less to the house and more to the trees, practicing a conversation that didn't need words. Marion stopped by with maps and coffee that tasted like late roads. They sat on the step and measured quiet. "You've done the thing," she said. "Raised him wild and loved him anyway." Samuel lifted his cup toward the timberline. He did the heavier lifting. The porch boards agreed with a small groan. Dusk trained the light into ribbons. Milo appeared at the far edge, half cat, half claws. He paused where Ranger used to stand guard, as if inventorying an absence, then slid along the fence without sound. He didn't approach the door. He didn't need to. The house recognized him the way scars know weather. A week later, the creek sang louder, urging distance to unspool. Samuel packed a day bag, thermos, salve, a coil of old habit, and stepped into the yard at first light. He wasn't hunting. He was walking toward a quiet that had been calling by a proper name. The air smelled of thaw and mossed stone. Tracks gathered where the meadow narrows fresh, clean, decisive. Milo had passed before dawn, angling toward the cut where elk shadow noon. Samuel followed at a respectful lag, eyes level, heart not chasing so much as keeping company. On the slope, wind braided pine and granite into a hymn without chorus. They met at the overlook, a seam of rock that lifts the whole valley, like a book you're not done with. Milo stood broadside, reading the day. He looked older. He was older, but age sat on him like authority, not ache. Samuel didn't speak. The bobcat turned, took him in, and did a small, deliberate thing. He sat, not in obedience, not in fatigue, in recognition. The two of them held the ridge together, a long breath where grief could idle and not stall. Below, the river rehearsed summer. Above, a hawk wrote a straight sentence and kept going. For a long minute, they were simply two animals located in mercy. When the wind shifted, Milo rose, ears cupping distance. He stepped forward 3 paces, then looked back. A question lived there, or a benediction. Samuel answered by staying still. The bobcat accepted the answer and slipped down slope, balancing on edges that welcomed him because he had learned their names. Clouds gathered from the west, a polite curtain. Samuel turned home by an easier line, the path Ranger once favoured. At the timber's mouth he paused, feeling watched in an untroubling way. He didn't turn. Some recognitions are strongest when not confirmed. The porch waited with the patience of old wood. Evening found Marion at the door, concern tucked clumsily behind paperwork. "You all right?" she asked. "All right," he said, and meant it. They drank in companionable silence. Out in the dusk, a single yip from a fox met a low, unseen answer, the kind of exchange that means everyone knows where they belong. First snow of next winter came early, dry as sifted bone. At dawn, Mariam found 2 trackways braided down the yard, 1 boot, 1 cat, paired for 50 steps, them parting like good roads. She smiled at the neatness of it and didn't mention it to anyone who would need it explained. The hill kept its counsel. Years rounded their corners. The cabin aged into the landscape until it looked borrowed rather than built. Sometimes, on blue hour evenings, a tawny shape paused by the threshold of light, not crossing, not retreating. People called it imagination. The boards called it memory. The trees called it by name. When the pines whispered hardest, the house whispered back. If you stood there long enough, you could hear a dog's steady breath pacing the hinge and a cat's quiet weight occupying the line. Between them, a man kept the porch, grateful and unafraid. And down in the drawer, fresh snow took the story and held. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.